They were
recovery.
like, she's going to die in 24 hours, basically. My mum was phoned over, and it was not come and see me. It was come and see me in time before I die.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then please do hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really does help make sure these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Joining me today is the award-winning broadcaster, journalist, author, documentary maker, producer, athlete and campaigner, Charlie Webster. Charlie is a woman with a turbocharged work ethic, Olympian levels of focus, and who is also a storyteller supreme, not least in the world of podcasts, where she's created some of the world's most listened to content. But perhaps Charlie's greatest superpower is her resilience, a resilience that has seen her achieve all this whilst carrying the weight of so much personal trauma. Charlie was verbally and physically abused by her stepfather, and as a teenager she was sexually abused by her running coach, a truly tragic story that she told so brilliantly in the BBC documentary Nowhere to Run, Abused by Our Coach. In 2016, after completing a 3,000-mile bike ride to Rio, Charlie contracted a rare strain of malaria and was put into a coma, doctors fearing that she may not last the night. Now, how she managed these crises is the subject of Charlie's brilliant new book, Why It's Okay to Talk About Trauma, a detailed guide for anyone who has suffered serious personal difficulty. So we're now in the company of a woman with that resilience, with courage, and with a determination to draw and share positives from the darkest of places. Charlie Webster, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Thank you so much for having me.
How you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. It's interesting listening to your introduction because, well, firstly, that's the first time I've heard author. So I'm like, whoa, yay! I'm an author now.
Charlie, it's all true.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I know.
No, I mean the achievements.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I mean, it's an astonishing kind of work ethic that sits behind it, and I definitely want to talk about that. But let's start specifically with this brilliant piece of work, your book, which is part memoir, but much more, as I say, a manual for anyone who's suffered trauma or who wants to support or better understand someone who's been in real difficulty. Now, you could, of course, have written a very different book, right? You could have written your memoir, which would have been a compelling read, fully justified as a standalone piece, but you chose not to. So tell me why you decided to do it this way.
I firstly love that you've asked me that question. It's really interesting because that's exactly the process I went through in my head. Is I feel like I've been through a lot, and I have, and I've also done a lot of battles within that. I wanted it to be a book that isn't just a book that you're going to read, but a book you can constantly pick up and refer to in different places, and that's how I've written it. But also I didn't want it to just be this, not just be because they're really powerful, but like so let's use the word self-help because that's the generic word, a self-help book. Because sometimes I feel like you can't quite relate to them, or, well, how's that apply to me? And I feel like sometimes you have to connect to the reality of the story to then understand the psychology and the behaviour around it. And so that's what I started to form. And also some of the process of my own work through trauma is intertwined basically with some of the stories of what's happened to me, to help you understand how you can relate to that and how you can take those things on for yourself, to look at how your own trauma has affected you. And even with that word, you know, I was even cautious to use that word because I wouldn't have looked at my life and gone, oh, I've been through trauma. But I thought it was really important to say it on the nose, which is why it's called Why It's Okay to Talk About Trauma and not dance around it either.
This is, I think, what sits behind the motivation for the book, is that there's got to be a conversation, a broader conversation, and more than a conversation, things have got to happen.
Because it does impact us.
That changes our the sort of viewpoint on this, and the conversation that we need to have after people have been through trauma is as important as important as the trauma itself. Now, saying all that, because this is a podcast, I've got to set some context. I've got to ask you questions about that, about what happened, so that we can move onto the second, and in a way, I know from your point of view, the more important part of the conversation, which is, what we now do about trauma, about PTSD specifically as well, and some of the other elements of it. So let's go right to the beginning, if that's all right, Charlie. Your mum was just 16 when she had you. She was still at school. In fact, I think she had to leave school when she
awful.
fell pregnant, which is just a
they kicked her out when they found out she was pregnant, so she couldn't sit her exams. So it's like, great, there you go. What chance are you giving her?
Just appalling.
Yeah.
And the knock-on effect of that, obviously, is.
Yeah.
She married but divorced your dad soon after, and it was just the two of you, homeless, I think, as well, in Sheffield for a while. Really, really tough start. And then she meets the man who becomes your stepfather. How old are you at this point? You're 8,
like
9
7. Yeah, 7 or 8, yeah. 7 when they met.
So in the years that follow, your stepfather abused you, emotionally and physically. You were, it seems, from his perspective, someone who was getting in the way of his relationship with your mum. I mean, you write, we touched on it, earlier, you write about elements of that abuse in the book. But it sort of strikes me that you were having to live a lie as well, I assume, because although there's those visceral moments, you're then going to school, you're living your life, you're growing up. Life was kind of a lie in some ways. Is that how you look at it?
It's an interesting perspective, because you are right. I didn't really it wasn't a choice, and that I feel like I consciously made. If you look at my school days, like, I don't think I even really understood. I knew it wasn't normal because I went to other people's houses and was like, oh wow, they're nice to people and they're nice to me. But I don't think, it's not like I consciously felt it was a lie, but I knew that that it was a fearful situation. But at the same time, I was like crying out for help, but at the same time not, because I also then felt it was my fault. Which I was made to feel, and that was actually told to me as a child. By
lie, what I mean is that you were at such a young age having to be probably a number of different people.
Absolutely, and that carried on for a long time, right up until recently, which is interesting, because I look back now, and there's times where I've been on television and I've gone back into that situation as an adult, because this carried on as an adult. Even you talked about, I've never really told anybody this, and it's not in the book, but when I was critically ill, which you mentioned at the top of the show, this situation still existed. And I was thinking about just the other day, funnily enough, where, my stepdad was trying to get my mum to come home from my bedside, because he was jealous of that. And I was in a coma when I'm in a coma. Yeah. So this actually went on for a long time. And you're absolutely right, because I did put on a big smile, even in my own head. So I tried to create this life for myself and run away from it. But it was always there, and it was always inside of me. And that, you said lie, but that facade was like a protective mechanism, but that also isolated me.
Yes.
And made me feel very lonely.
Of course.
Because you sit there with a smile on your face where deep inside you just feel hurt and sad and different. But that's, I suppose, a lot of what I talk about in the book is the reason why we need to talk is because I felt like I was two people and I was always arguing with myself. So the smiley person that, say, is sat in front of you now, this is genuinely me, but, in the past was like always in conflict with the other part of me that would still walk into that situation. And then I would argue with myself even about that. But it's very complex, and this is what people sometimes maybe don't understand about, say abusive relationships, it's extremely complex and complicated why people stay in this situation and how hard it is to actually leave. And actually, when you leave, it's the most dangerous point. And family dynamics, as I'm sure everybody can relate to, are complicated because for me, I stayed in that situation. I feel like I'm dancing around it, so I hope that doesn't come across. But basically, my mum was in this relationship for 29 years.
Yes.
So it didn't just end just when I turned 18, so this carried on. And
It created all sorts of other difficult dynamics.
It really did, but there was no way. I made a choice that I would stay in it so that I could have a relationship with my mum and that I could in some way protect her. It made me feel like I was and give her some kind of happiness in moments. And also I've got younger brothers and, I was fiercely and I'm still fiercely protective of them and a few of my friends used to question, why I didn't cut myself off from family, and there's no way in a million years that I would ever do that,
I hope this isn't a question too far. If it is, just tell me. But have you been able to confront him?
God. No. And no. And I've got absolutely no interest in doing that because he is a narcissist, so he will never be able to take accountability for himself, and that's okay, because that's not remotely what I need anyway. I can't speak for the rest of my family, but I don't need that. I needed to be away from him, and I need for him not to be in my life or be anywhere near my mum or my family. But there's times, especially when it kind of came to a head where I tried to stick up for myself and speak up, which was very hard. And again, it's this, it's really interesting what you touched upon, because it's this irony that I would stick up for myself in a work situation, say, sometimes, and I put myself in these kind of fierce situations sometimes where you mentioned the word courage, where it would seem like, I had a lot of courage and I would nothing would stand in my way. But I couldn't remotely stand up to my stepdad.
But isn't the truth, Charlie, that you have? And if we, standing up to someone comes in many forms.
Yeah.
Those that are listening rather than watching this, I am now holding up your book. This is standing up, right?
Yeah, true. But that's not to do with him.
No.
So for me, it's it is standing up and it is having a voice. But more importantly, it's a way to try and connect with other people who have felt the same and feel the same.
Let's move forward to when you're 15. You're a talented young athlete and you decide to join the local running club where there's a group of equally talented girls. At first, I guess this club was a release for you. Somewhere.
And I actually joined that club at 11.
You joined at 11?
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
So I was there from a young age, as soon as I started secondary school.
Right, okay. Somewhere away from the sort of wretched situation at home then.
And oh my God, I loved it.
Starts as an escape.
It was the best thing ever. I mean, I'm even smiling now. If you're listening, I've got a massive smile on my face because it was an escapism. I just could be a different person again. It just brings me back to that. One of your earlier questions about, living a lie or living these two different people is, at school I was the same. At school I was kind of quite outgoing, quite funny, quite, bolshy in a way. And at the running club I was similar, had a big personality, but at home I was quiet as a mouse. I literally wouldn't say anything. And I would never speak about myself ever. So it's really interesting how which one of these am I? Who actually am I? And but when I got to the running club, it was something that I was good at. So I was like, oh my God, I'm not actually, excuse me for swearing, but I'm not actually a piece of shit on somebody's shoe, which is what I thought I was. I actually can do something, and these people like me and they're kind to me. And it was an all-girls running club, and we used to have a right laugh. It was a release, but the running was a way that, oh my God, I had so much pent-up emotion of this massive ball of pain and like but I didn't quite realize at the time, and anger and like destruction inside of me, that when I'd run it'd like I'd be able to breathe. Like I'm kind of almost acting it out because it's hard to almost put words to it, because I'd run and I'd just be able to go, oh my God, I can breathe for a moment, because I'd hold on to everything, you know, like even at home I'd hold my breath because my breath would make a sound, right? So being able to run and just be physical, oh God, it gave so much to my life. It gave me like family, a sense of belonging, an emotional release. You know, it'd give me a little tiny bit of self-worth. So yeah, it was everything to me.
What's interesting, Charlie, one element that interests me about this is that so often with trauma and with crisis, obviously a word we use a lot on this podcast, is that when you have a situation that is ultimately traumatic, which of course this situation was for you with the running club, the whole lot ends up in a dark place. The whole lot can kind of end up in the bin if you're not careful. And yet you seem to have, you know, your immediate reaction when I mention an environment that in the end became very traumatic for you, you smile.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right, that you're able to kind of say, no, I'm not going to let, you know, the behaviour of this appalling individual infect every single bit of my memory around those times. There was a lot of positive.
Yeah, but that's taken time. So I really want to say that, because it's irresponsible if I don't. It's not like I was able to just do that.
Of course.
So like that has taken time.
And that's been important to you, right? To be able to smile now about being in that club is important to you.
Yeah, and I think part of, like, for those that didn't watch the BBC documentary Nowhere to Run, like, some of that was connecting with those that were all now women, but girls at the time, has definitely helped. Like, I absolutely love running, even to this day, and I still run, but there's certain things that definitely bring in memories and flashbacks. You know, I couldn't run on a track for a long time, so I'd run out in the woods and on the pavement and in the streets, because it immediately just puts you in those moments. And ironically, I wasn't even abused at a running track. I was never sexually abused at a running track, but I was definitely emotionally abused there. And we were groomed at a running track. But just the being on that running track, any running track, just like, even talking to you now, I can feel things and I can see things. You could argue all day long when we were actually groomed, because you could say it was the moment I walked in the door at 11 years old, right? And but I wasn't actually physically sexually abused until I was 15 by him. And then he actually went to prison when I was 19.
Let's use his name, shall we? Paul North.
Yeah, you should like to. I find that very difficult too.
Do you?
You can, yeah.
Let's talk about the documentary a little bit more. It's an important bit of television. And in it, you return to Sheffield, as you say. You go back to the school, in fact, where your coach abused you. Very emotional scene of you standing outside that building. Yeah,
that's the first time I'd been back.
Yeah.
And that school I didn't actually go to that school, just to give a bit of context for people that haven't seen it. So I wasn't abused in a school environment. I was abused in a school setting, because he was the caretaker of a primary school. I know, it's awful, but he was our running coach, but he'd use the school hall after hours to do gym and weight sessions. So that's why I was abused in a school, just because I don't want it to get confusing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a incredibly powerful scene. There was some debate as to whether or not that should be included.
Yeah, you know, I have to say that the BBC were hugely supportive, and I'm not just giving that line just because people hear those lines. They really were, and so much so that they have this thing called editorial policy and safeguarding, and after I helped them advise more on how they could help and protect people in terms of storytelling, because that's really important, because it is quite distressing. You know, I think for that whole time I was filming, I had nightmares every night.
Did you really?
Yeah, and that scene outside the school was actually a longer scene, which wasn't all included, and there was some debate because the BBC were concerned that, was it too upsetting for people to see me upset? And my argument throughout that, and honestly, I would have, and maybe this is wrong for me to say this, but I probably would have said, you know what, it's not going out then unless that scene's included, because it is so irresponsible if I'd have gone and done that documentary with a shiny, polished, smiley face. Like, I mean, I look like crap sometimes in it. And because that's the reality of it. And because it's not a smiley, shiny face. And for every victim and survivor, or anybody who's even remotely been through any kind of, you know, whether it's physical, sexual, or it's emotional abuse, it knows that that's not that. So if I don't reflect that on television, then I'm isolating victims and survivors even more. So it's really important that I show like how this has affected me and still affects me, because I want to show victims and survivors that that is normal for you to feel like that. Look at what you've just been through, or look at what you went through 20 years ago. How can you not have those feelings? And so we drove up there and I was getting cold sweats. I was like getting anxious. I was rubbing my hands, and even so much so that I was with two other people, two women, and one was the director and one was like a kind of assistant producer, researcher, and they're both amazing. And they were like, "Are you sure you're okay doing this?" I was like, "No, let's do it." And then I got out of the car and I was sick, which obviously wasn't on the thing. I was literally, that's how reactive it was. Physically sick. I was like, like gagging. And it was really upsetting. And I thought it was really important that that scene stayed in the documentary, because that is real life. And I'm not making a documentary to, oh, look at what I've been through. The documentary was to help people understand the grooming process of sexual abuse, help people understand the impact that it has. And of course, like in saying all this, you can live well. No matter what you've been through, you can live well as a survivor. I'm sat here and I'm so proud, of everything that I've been through. Even that, I got through that. That wasn't my fault. But we have to talk about it. We have to show the impact it has.
You did that in that scene. There are a couple of other moments as well. There are several moments, but there are two others. One is a conversation with your mother.
Yeah.
Right. A very difficult conversation.
Yeah.
That's there on camera. I mean, it's brave of both of you, actually.
That conversation was, and again, I said to my mum, look, if you don't want to do it, it's not, I asked her and that was it. I left her to decide. It was up to her. There was no pressure. And, but I thought it was a powerful conversation because we're talking specifically about sexual abuse now. So I'll stay there because parents are groomed too. And that's important to acknowledge that. Like, part of the process, my mum was groomed. She thought that I was going to a safe place that actually was away from the unsafe place at home. And she knew that. She thought that this was something that would be positive for me. And, and he helped. He took me to races. He picked me up from training sometimes. And so, she thought it was helping. But, she was also a victim of domestic abuse at the time. So it was very hard for her to see because she was also just in survival mode, right? But it was important that we had that conversation because it is something that people ask. But that was hard for me because also I'm very protective over my mum. So I find it hard sometimes to ask my mum those questions because I don't want to hurt her and because it's not about that. But, I know for a fact that every single parent of that group felt guilty, but the guilt wasn't theirs.
No, exactly.
At all.
Exactly. There's another scene where you kind of confront your own misplaced guilt.
Yeah.
Because it's a conversation with a girl who was abused sometime after you were abused. Because we should explain, by the way, that this person was abusing girls over quite a long period of time, both before you and after you. And indeed, some of the girls that you were with at the same time, so contemporaries of yours, that each of you didn't know that was happening.
Exactly, that's really important for you to point out.
Yeah,
we didn't know.
You didn't know
no.
At all.
And we all thought it was ourselves and that...
Yeah, and he obviously worked pretty hard to put up barriers between you.
100% did that. But he did that. He manipulated us within that group.
Yes.
So, again, this is why it's important to understand grooming. Yeah. There's absolutely zero point in talking about sexual abuse if we don't talk about grooming and understand how it's done. Yeah. Otherwise, we're never going to change anything.
The conversation where you confront your own, as I say, misplaced guilt is you I think, meeting for the first time another girl who was abused sometime after you. And in fact, she was one of the people, I think, that was involved in driving the court case forward and gave evidence. And you apologised to her. It's a very moving scene. It is totally misplaced guilt. And in fact, one of the reasons it's so moving is because that's immediately her reaction, is to say, what on earth do you mean?
Yeah.
There's only one person to blame.
It makes me a bit upset now,
but there's
actually
only
talking about
There's only
it.
one person to blame for all this.
But the thing about, like, it's bringing tears to my eyes, because the thing about that's so awful about being abused is that you do feel like it's a misplaced shame or feeling of, like, well, was it me? And, you know, part of that is because society gives, you know, messaging and sometimes subliminal messaging that makes you feel like that. But also that's also the tool of an abuser, because that's how they keep you quiet, right? So for me, I felt like I was the first one and I wasn't, but I didn't know that until I made the documentary years later.
Yes.
You know, the documentary only came out like 3 years ago. That I didn't know. That's how long I lived my life thinking that it was me. It started with me. If I'd have said something, I would have prevented the other girls that came after me. So I felt like I did feel guilty, and like it makes me upset thinking about it, because, you know, I felt ashamed for a long time about what happened to me. And then sitting there listening to, she's called Rosie, and it's okay for me to say her name because she's given permission. But like, you know, speaking to Rosie and I know how it's impacted her life. You know, I wish I could have done something to stop it. And sadly, another person who was abused after me is now not even here anymore because of what happened.
I wanted to mention, it's important, I think, that we sort of touch on that. Because there is this is a story of trauma, but it is also a story of tragedy.
Yeah, it really is.
Indeed, there are two people, I think.
Yeah.
One that you knew about, one that you've only happened in 2023, last year.
Yeah.
Who took two girls who took their own lives.
Yeah, Georgina and Katie.
As a result of the abuse that they suffered.
Yeah, and that's why I've written a book, because, you know, we've got to understand that this stuff does impact us. It's a part of our lives because it's happened to us. Everything that's happened to us is part of our lives, whether it's something that's horrible and distressing or whether it's something that's good. And it's really important that we acknowledge that, because otherwise we can't understand or help people to work through the aftermath of it. And I 100% with all my heart believe that if we'd have been helped and supported, Georgina, who took her life 19 years old, so shortly after the court case, because she was a little bit younger than me, would still be here. And Katie took her life last January, because it was still there for her. It didn't go because she didn't get help. Because, you know, we talk about adversity, we talk about people coming through these things, but we also have to acknowledge the people that haven't got through these things.
Yes.
You know?
Charlie, you were 19, as you say, when North was eventually convicted and sentenced to 10 years. Did that give you any kind of resolution at all?
No, it didn't.
Not a bit of it.
No, and I'm actually really glad you asked that, because we use the word justice, right? And we have to be really careful with that, because I'm so glad that he got convicted, because it stopped with us, right? It stopped with our group. And so nobody else would carry on getting abused. And there's justice in that, but there wasn't justice for us.
Yes.
Like, it had already happened to us. The only justice we could have got is we should have got helped. That was more important for us. And so, like, when we talk about I do, I want to make sure that, bringing somebody to justice is also important, because you're holding them accountable, right? Which is important for a victim and survivor. And it's like, you are valid. This did happen to you. That's important. But I suppose what I mean is, like, he goes to prison, and then the next day I wake up and then I'm like, so what am I left with?
My life is
what's
the same.
Katie left with? What's Georgina left with? What's all these?
And not
Rosie
at any
left
point,
with?
not at any point did anyone reach out to you to say, look, we need to, the stuff we're going to need to deal with here.
No.
It's just...
No. And nobody ever has, still now.
But this is the point. At this juncture of the story, though, this is the point, right? Is that we don't think about... there's a lot of discussion around, the victim. We have some good things in the system now, like victim impact statements, I think are a great introduction into the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we still don't have that net that sits around the victim that says, you have been damaged, this is going to stay with you, you are going to need help.
And that's what, there's a victims bill that's going to be passed shortly, and that's something I campaigned around with the victims bill, is you can't, to me, you can't ask victims of any crime, and especially domestic and sexual abuse, to put yourself through that, to come forward, to be part of the justice system, the criminal justice system, and then just dump them and leave them once you've got your conviction. Because, again, I go back to the justice. It's really important we do that, by the way, because abusers are repetitive, so they'll keep on going.
Of course.
So it's important we stop them. So there's the prevention element, but then this person here, that's the victim, needs then specialist help, because trauma and, sexual abuse has a long-term impact.
In 2014, actually, give an interview. So this is sometime later. You give an interview to Radio 5 and reveal that you were abused as a teenager. A huge decision for you.
Yeah.
And then in sort of parallel to having taken that decision, your TV career is motoring. You're in a very competitive, very challenging work environment, if I can put it that way. In and around sport, certain types of characters, a certain type of environment, and yet you're thriving. And you're also running marathons. You do the final 3 stages of the Tour de France, Ironmans. I mean, it's astonishing. These 2 things that are kind of running in your life. You are also privately struggling, self-harming. You mentioned drinking in the book, difficult and failed relationships also, one of which I think was abusive. And then in September 2016, you embark on the epic challenge of a 3,000-mile charity cycle from London to Rio. Before we get to what happened immediately after your illness, I mean, give me an idea of what your state of mind is, because it strikes me that you've got all this difficulty still in your mind, and yet you get on a bike and choose to ride 3,000 miles. Well, I might say that there is a connection between those 2 things. Tell me.
It's a good question, actually. My state of mind was probably very determined. There's an element of, we could go really deep into this, but there's probably an element, I look back now, of I cycled 3,000 miles, probably very little care really about myself, so I would push myself to the limit.
So it was risk?
Risky, yes. Risky behaviour is also a kind of consequence of trauma. I'd literally, one of the things the psychologist I work with said to me is which we can get onto, is that, I had very little self-care. I'd just do whatever and just feel that I could push myself to the limit. And that was that. I feel like I so much of my life has just been in a lot of pain, emotional pain. And I really feel that from other people. So I feel like if I'm in a position, I'll do whatever I can to try and ease that for other people.
You complete the ride, in fact.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Tell us
and
what happens.
It's so crazy, because there's a video of me at the top of Christ Redeemer, because I actually did some radio interviews at the top, and then I did some social things, and I did this video that I think went out on 5 Live, and 24 hours later, I was in hospital struggling to breathe. 24 hours after that, I was put on life support and in a coma. So it happened so quick.
So you contracted this rare strain of
malaria. So I had malaria, and I had 3 other things as well. I had Shigella, hemolytic remit syndrome, and chikungunya, which are a mixture of parasite and bacterial things. But the malaria was the
presumably you've
the
been
big...
carrying these things for a while during the trip.
So malaria actually doesn't really show its symptoms until like I think 2 weeks after.
Right, okay.
But it happened very quickly. And again, this is a super long story, so I'll try and do it quick. But I was actually meant to be presenting the games, so I did actually go on camera, I think once or maybe twice. But the camera went on my face, and then as soon as the camera turned off me, I was bent over and I was starting to get stomachache, and I was having to run to the toilet. I went to the opening ceremony of the games, and I went to the toilets and literally collapsed in the toilets. But instead of asking for help, and again, this is to do with my trauma in my past, I didn't ask for help because I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed. So there were so many things that went in my head, like, well, I'm not going to be able to turn up for, like, people are going to wonder where I am. I need to work, all these things. So I was just going to take myself home, and not home, but, to where I was staying in Rio, and I'll be fine the next day. The next thing I know is I'm lying in a hospital bed, actually phoning my agent going, tell them I'll be there tomorrow. It's fine. Just get somebody to cover for me today. And as I was telling my agent, I'm fine. Don't tell anyone. Just tell them I'll be work tomorrow. The doctor walks in and tells me that I'm dying. Exact words, you're dying, organ failure. So in broken English, you're dying, organ failure, and he even wrote it down on a bit of paper, which I make a joke about in the book. It's kind of obviously not funny, but he actually wrote it on a bit of paper so I'd understand. And that was it. I just was like panicking about this big contract I'd got to present the games, right? So I was like trying to, but then at the same time I was trying to get hold of my mum, and then they wouldn't put me in intensive care without my insurance kicking in, my travel insurance. So everybody, please get travel insurance. My God, if I hadn't got travel insurance, I would be in so much debt. I'd be bankrupt, I'd be in debt. My whole family would, I can't even tell you like how the fact that I had travel insurance, but it took a while to kick in, and they wouldn't move me to intensive care without my travel insurance kicking in. This is like another crazy story that not a lot of people know. But
So you are put into a coma.
Yeah.
The decision is made, the chain of events a bit further down the road,
literally within that 24 hours.
That's what's needed.
Yeah, otherwise I was going to die.
Yeah. But then you're aggressively resuscitated, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because they're concerned actually that you're deteriorating whilst you're in the coma rather than
They were like, she's going to die in 24 hours, basically. My mum was phoned over, and it was not come and see me. It was come and see me in time before I die. That's basically what she was told.
That's what the doctor said to her.
Yeah. And that if the chance of me surviving was like 0.00001% or something stupid. And if I did survive, I would be severely disabled. That's what my mum was told. So, like, there was no... And they didn't even know what was wrong with me at that point. So, obviously I know now that it's malaria and these other things that I mentioned, but they didn't know that. Right. They were just trying to keep me alive. I was on dialysis. I'd got multiple organ failure. I'd got a breathing tube in because I couldn't breathe for myself. I'd got all these tubes in. I'd got like electrode things on my head because they thought I was brain damaged because there was problems with the signals coming from my brain. Like,
so what was the turning point? When did the recovery start? Presumably not long after you came out of you were brought out of the coma.
Yeah, so I was brought. So I was in a coma for 2 weeks, and it was pretty much touch and go. And then there was another point, I think, which is when I was resuscitated because my heart stopped, which was at the end. And then I took a good turn, but it's because they found I got malaria and started treating me, pretty much. I mean, I've made it quite basic, but it is complicated.
And you stayed in hospital for how long?
I stayed in hospital in Rio for like 2 months. Until I was well enough to be repatriated, and I was repatriated on a medical plane with 2 doctors, a nurse and a doctor, and flown on a tiny medical plane, which took 22 hours because they had to stop 5 times. And then I was taken to St. James's Hospital in Leeds, which I'm so grateful for them, everybody at St. James's, if there's anybody listening. And then I was in hospital there for, I think, another 6+ weeks.
It's just layer after layer. But I hope I've understood this correctly, whilst in a coma, you know, you've described it as being trapped with your past, if you like.
Yeah.
You've got that constant track being played. You remember that still quite viscerally now.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, brings everything that we've been talking about to the surface. Not immediately. Obviously, this is a while later after you've come back because you're dealing with the physical difficulties of what's happened to you. But then the PTSD kicks in.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, what happened is that when I was in the coma, I remember being in the coma. And again, another message. Look, people can hear, so respect that. So if you've ever been in a situation or you've got a loved one or you're a practitioner, like, people can hear, it's not just a body lying there. So, you know, I could hear what was going on, and it was very distressing, but also reassuring because I knew my mum was there and one of my brothers was there as well. And that also gave me so much to fight for. But what also happened, which was your question, is it was like all these things that I'd blocked, all these memories and feelings that I blocked just came smashing in from every direction. You know, I was having flashbacks about what my coach did and having to be forced back to go and train with him. Like, all these things that started to happen. Things that happened with my stepdad, like sitting behind a door, like waiting to hear him come in. Is he going to come and do something to me? Like, I'm too scared to go to the toilet. You know, all these things started to, like, and I'm in a frigging coma fighting for my life. And all these things that have happened to me. And it is like, I was like trapped in my own head. It was the most, I can't even describe how distressing it was. Never mind for the fact that I knew I was fighting for my life. And I was also like desperately, I keep using the word distress because I can't think of a better word. Like, I was desperately distressed that my mom was distressed. You know, it's like, so all these things happened in the coma, believe it or not. And you know, a little thing I'd like to throw in just to kind of show was whenever my mum came onto the ward, that's when my all the machines would go off. Because I could sense when she came onto the ward. How crazy is that?
Right.
And it was every single time, to the point where sometimes they'd stop her coming on because then I would start fighting.
Right.
So, and I couldn't see her. I'm in a coma.
God, the link between you and your mum.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So then, obviously you said the recovery, it was all about physical recovery. So months, I had to relearn how to walk again, all these things. And then it was like, oh, I'm not okay mentally or emotionally. How do I deal with the fact that I just died and I'm still here? And what about all these things that just came in? And I tried to, you know, get back into some kind of normality or normal life. And I just was not okay. And all these thoughts that happened to me in the coma, you know, I didn't feel like myself anymore. I couldn't come to grips with the fact that I just nearly wasn't here anymore. It's so confusing. I can't even begin to tell you.
Of course.
And then you're, you know, and everybody was saying to me, "Oh my God, you look amazing. I can't believe what you're going through." And inside, I'm just dying. Like, I'm dying again. So
you're saying in the book that people are saying to you, you know, you're so lucky to be alive, and yet the last thing you feel is lucky. Because of what it's opened up. So you meet Dr.
But I'm grateful for all the support.
Of course. You meet Dr. Rachel O'Beanie. Have I pronounced her name correctly? She's a consultant clinical psychologist, and your recovery, that marks the start of your recovery. And what is it that she said, can I ask, that caused you to stop running, if you like?
I'm glad you asked that, because also getting help isn't easy. In the end, I kept saying I'm fine. And I also said that all I want to talk about is Rio. So I call it Rio, by the way, the cycle ride and being ill. It's nicknamed like that in our family now. When we refer to Rio, we refer to what happened to me, the critical illness we call Rio.
It.
Yeah, personalised it. I'm like, oh yeah, Rio. Was that before Rio? After? And I said, I only want to talk about that. I've nearly just said that's all I want to talk about. And she was trying to talk about the past and then my childhood and how that interplayed. And she in the end, she just went, well, if you're fine, what's the point of you being here then? And I was like, excuse me? I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, if you're fine, why are you even sat here then? And it was the best thing she did, because then I broke down. Because it was like this wall that was so strong that I put up for so long was really hard to start taking down. And, it just started to kind of come out then. And then that's when the work started.
The core of the work is that she found ways for you to access and, in a way, sort of re-experience the past.
Yeah.
So that you could begin to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well done. You summed that up really well. I'm going to take that.
It's only because I've read your book.
Oh, right. Okay, good. That's summed up exactly, because, look, it's really, really hard to overcome these things. But you know what's even harder is staying in it. Staying in it is far harder, So doing the work involved me having to bring up these emotions that I just desperately didn't want to. But they were there anyway. They were there anyway, and it was so much more exhausting trying to push them down all the time than actually bringing them out. But they're hard to access because, we're amazing survivors, right? Human beings can survive anything. We survive incredible crisis, but that doesn't mean we survive. We can survive physically.
Doesn't mean we thrive.
No,
sure.
It doesn't mean we thrive. And actually, that when it then becomes mental, then that also can physically kill us.
Now, Charlie, because of time, I'm skimming through so much stuff. I wanted to talk about the work that you've done with malaria. You've spoken at the US Senate, the UN, our own parliament. You've done, as I've said, you've hit the road again, more Ironmans. And by the way, you build from scratch one of the world's most successful podcast companies. If it's not already, it's certainly on track. You've just come in from Los Angeles where you picked up 2 Webbies. I'm envious and so admiring of what you've done, because the content is amazing. And some of the content touches on your story, some of it doesn't. Some of it is just brilliant storytelling of other people's incredible tales. Some of it tales of crisis. It's just a brilliant work, so congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I want to ask you just one other question, because we've explained, I think, the importance of this discussion around PTSD, but one of the conversations that we're also trying to have on this podcast is just around resilience, right? And the need for us to be more resilient. And that does not run counter to what you've just said. That is not about putting things in a box or pushing the past away or denial, far from it. But it is also about finding something in you and gripping that thing and putting it to work to move forward in a positive way. And you have that in spades, right? And the word resilience is not, I'm sensing, even as the way you're looking at me now, is not necessarily the one that you sort of like. No. Is it because you feel it has a sense of denial about it, a stiff upper lip stuff?
Yeah. And it's about endure. You have to endure.
Yeah. But it is also important, isn't it? It is a human attribute. You have it. And what's interesting, obviously, about your story is how much of it is because of what's happened to you and how much of it is just in you. Because this drive that you have across everything that you do, and I know that it's all associated, I know it's all connected.
Yeah, it is.
But you do have an innate resilience and drive.
Yeah, I
right
think...
or wrong?
Yeah, so I think... Look, it's really important that we have resilience, right? But the reason why I slightly have a problem with the word is probably the way it's sometimes used. So for me, when I was younger, I didn't have a choice, right? It's not like I chose to be resilient. It's really like I didn't choose to be resilient. I didn't have a choice. I was just surviving. So it's important that we don't put that word on.
I suppose what I'm saying is that all of your achievements are not all... I'm asking the question, do you attribute them all to the person you had to be to survive?
No, because that's hopefully who I am anyway. And, you know, things like the one of the most recent achievements, like it was only yesterday, as we're recording this, that I found out I won 2 Webby Awards. You know, that's... I mean, well, part of it is obviously because that's just who I am. So part of it is attributed to my life. But at the same time, that's not because of this child that kind of had to be resilient. I suppose, look, my slight problem with the word is I was so resilient that I didn't deal with the pain inside. That's my point I want to get across.
There's a danger in resilience.
Exactly. Yeah, so we have to be careful that we don't band around resilience as build more resilience, where it then becomes just endure things, because people actually stay in abusive relationships because they're so resilient, right? So we have to also, there's a fine line. I'm probably more resilient than I've ever been, even though I was so resilient. And the reason why is because I can sit here and have a conversation about this to you now. I can be vulnerable. The amount of times I've probably nearly cried in our conversation, I would never have done that before. I can attach to emotions. I can connect. I can love. I can receive love. Okay? So sometimes when you become so resilient, which is I've definitely been in the past, I had no self-care. Look at the cycle ride. I was so resilient. I can cycle 3,000 miles. I could have carried on. I could have done it through the night. That's so resilient, but that's dangerous. You know, Dr. Rachel, who you've mentioned, said to me that the one thing she was so concerned about with me is that the next time I will die. Because she was like, if you don't get help, you will go and do the next extreme thing and you won't be here anymore. She was scared for my life because of how resilient I was.
I get it. But this is why this stuff is so tricky, because, you know, everything that you've told us, this entire conversation, I don't think there's anybody who's watching or listening who would not agree that it absolutely should be described in the way that you've described it in your book as trauma. It is extreme crisis and trauma without any shadow of a doubt. But there's also an awful lot that happens in life that requires resilience.
It does.
And that isn't trauma.
Yeah.
And one of the other problems that we've got, you mentioned the importance of using the right word. We apply those words to everything. We apply the word trauma in the wrong way.
I know
we say that something's traumatic, you know, when it absolutely isn't. Yeah. It doesn't get anywhere near.
Yeah, or depressed. We use the word depression the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. And trauma and triggers and all these words. Right. It's like, oh my God, that meating triggered me. And it's like, right. You know.
So, and I speak as someone who's got a podcast called Crisis, What Crisis, where I use the word twice. We've got to be super careful about the words we use. You are such a unbelievable example to people of how to deal with, you know, the most difficult of stuff. You know, the fact that you sit here and talk to me about it in the way that you have. First of all, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
For doing that. But you are, you know, you are the most incredible example, Charlie, you know, and your book is the latest manifestation of it, but I suspect it will not be the last.
Hopefully.
I suspect it will not be the last. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for telling us this incredible story.
Thank you.
And long may your work continue. If you've enjoyed this conversation with Charlie, then please do leave us a review and a rating. If you found it helpful or inspiring even, we would be delighted if you would recommend us to your friends. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and if you hit subscribe, you'll find a lot more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts are available on our website along with links. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com. Thanks so much for listening.